From 1987 to 1989, actress Caroline Bliss was Miss Moneypenny, and to many James Bond fans still is. However, a meeting with actor Terence Stamp was set to change, over time, her path forever. This path was to become one of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. I met up with Caroline in the now home county of Gloucestershire to find out more about her journey from actress to spiritual teacher. We begin the journey in the Sherborne Cinema, Gloucester. So Caroline, thank you so much for spending time with me and being this wonderful Sherborne Cinema to be interviewed.
Fantastic, isn't it? This is a great location. Well done for finding it.
Thank you very much. So I've been looking about your career on the internet and various different things, and I see that one of your first acting roles that I could see was actually playing Princess Diana before she was actually Diana. But can you actually tell me about your very first time experience in acting? It could be when you were at school or drama school, anything like that, but how you first got into it and how that love for acting first came about in you.
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I mean, there are various memories that all crowd in, and I guess at school, at little school, we did the sort of nativity every year, and I think I was Mary one year, which I just absolutely loved. Then I went to grammar school in Hammersmith, and there was no acting to speak of, and acting didn't cross my mind, even though my parents had been actors, but they weren't working as I was growing up, and my father was by then teaching driving, so it wasn't kind of something I ever thought of. And so I became a dancer first, and I knew I wanted to perform, and I used to dance in my room at home, and I used to go to a little dance school around the corner, which was very sort of Isadora Duncan kind of modern dance. And I trained at Ballet Rambert, but my body was not a dancer's body, in the sense that you have to be turned out, you have to be very strong, you have to have the instep on your foot, to do point work and all of this. And so eventually somebody suggested to me acting. So I have to say that I don't think I was a natural actress, and I arrived to audition at the drama schools, and when I think back on it, I just must have been excruciating. I did Cleopatra's dying speech badly, and I did a speech from a book that I'd found. I mean, I really didn't know what I was doing, and amazingly got into into Lambda and Bristol. And Lambda was right round the corner from where my parents lived, so I thought, well, Bristol, I'll go to Bristol. So when I arrived in Bristol and started acting, what you would then call probably my first experience of proper acting, it was a shock because I just didn't know what I was doing. And you could say that, well, surely everyone else doesn't know what they're doing because we're at drama school, but I was in the 2-year course where people had been to university and they'd done a lot of acting. So they had this kudos and this confidence, and they were a little bit older than I was. But because I'd had the experience on stage as a dancer, the school thought, well, she'd be good for the 2-year course. But of course, being a dancer, you're aware of every movement. I remember the head taking me aside and saying, Caroline, every time you move on stage as an actress, you're moving like a ballet dancer. Every movement was graceful. And he said, you're going to have to cut all that out and start again. So yes, it was a struggle. At the very beginning. That's before I got to Princess Diana.
Although there was, as you say, a struggle at the beginning, the work that I do, I think you can learn an awful lot through mistakes, through failures. What do you think you really learnt from that, and that you might have not got if you hadn't have been through those times before getting there?
I think I learnt what not to do, and I made my mistakes at drama school, which is exactly what it's about. You don't get your confidence built up, though, by making those mistakes at drama school. So that's a difficulty of it. Whereas the ones that were shining and, were having their confidence built up, But at the same time, I did learn a sort of, I guess, a self-awareness. I knew what bad habits to let go of, and I started to learn my strengths and weaknesses and what kind of actress I was. So I didn't just, a lot of the others were not having to think about that. They were just, as you say, coming out of university, coming into drama school, having a ball, and not really needing to go through some of that process.
There might be somebody watching right now that wishes to become an actor and thinking about going to drama school. What advice could you give them from the perspective of going through that yourself?
Oh, it's a really weird thing to say, but the first thing I would say is if you can do anything else, or if you have a skill, or if you're passionate about anything else as well as acting, try that first, because the acting life is extremely demanding. Drama school is extremely demanding, and you have to know it's not just a kind of dream or a fun thing to do. You have to know that it's in every fibre of your being, because otherwise you won't grab the moments at drama school and work really hard, and you won't be able to face the rejection and the criticism that you need in order to grow. So it has to be something, a lot of parents will say to me, oh, I think my child's going to be an actor or an actress because they're always performing. And I want to say, no, that's actually probably not true. The actors that make it through are often the shy ones, are often the ones who are not comfortable in themselves, but give them the school play or give them a part, and suddenly something in them comes alive and they go, this is who I am and what I have to do. But when they get back off stage, they're back to being, just sort of themselves. So the image that people have of these sort of lovey actors of being a child prodigy and always performing is not true at all.
I know certain people that, as you say, that are actually in the acting field, and they are probably quite shy people deep down inside. We'll be talking about it later, but I just want to put a little bit of the spirituality into that. Did you find that it was difficult to have your own identity with playing all these different parts, or did you find that okay? Because I remember hearing John Pertwee, when he actually got the role as being the Doctor in Doctor Who, they said, we want you to play it as John Pertwee. So, well, who the hell's he? Because he didn't know himself. Can you identify with that at all?
I can. But I was completely unaware that was the situation. I didn't know who I was, but I didn't know that I didn't know who I was. If so, John Pertwee was clearly at an age or at a stage where he realised that, but I was unaware and just enjoying trying these different characters on. And I think the other thing was that I was a character actress stuck in a sort of quite glamorous persona, and I think that was, again, I can only see that in retrospect, that I was much happier in comedy or in character roles that sort of unlocked something, whereas just playing the sort of the pretty girl or the whatever it was, I found very awkward.
Your first role that you did was as Lady Diana, or probably Diana before she became Lady Diana. What was it like? Because it was actually quite a big role. You had quite a big part going throughout that. What was it like for you to suddenly go into that as your first role?
Well, it was really interesting because it came up while I was still at drama school, and they don't really encourage you to miss your time at drama school. Obviously, and yet to have a job in the business was good. So through being a dancer and through doing some advertising work, through some of the contacts I'd made, I did have an acting agent, and she had suggested me for this role. So I went up for it, And the Americans were all sort of sitting there in a row when I walked in. And the one thing I was quite good at was auditioning. I quite enjoyed the audition process, which is, a lot of actors hate it, but luckily I quite enjoyed it. And I loved auditioning for Americans because they were very up and kind of positive. So I walked in and sat down, never for a minute thinking that I was anything like Diana. It just hadn't occurred to me. I don't think I look very much like her. And of course, all my frizzy hair and all of that. But I didn't have it. I guess I had it a bit straighter. But so I walked in and I could see them also thinking, well, I'm not sure. And halfway through the meeting, they said something. And for some bizarre reason, my reaction was I went, oh, and they all went, oh my God, she's done it naturally, because I'd done a Diana. And I hadn't been watching her or studying her, but I'd just sort of done, and I knew in that moment that I had the role. It was that everything changed. They started talking to me about filming dates and everything, and I left thinking, have I really got that? So then when I was offered it, it was a sort of weird thing to do, really, to suddenly play somebody who was alive and very much there. And it just sort of, it was an odd one, because it wasn't really like an acting role, and yet it was. So, but my Prince Charles, David Robb, was lovely and a very good actor, and there were wonderful actors in it. So I just thought, well, okay, what a great way to start. So I went off to do the filming, and then I arrived back at drama school in time for the final show. That they invite, I think they took it up to London. Did we take it to London? And the drama school invite agents and people to all come and see it. And they'd given me a sort of 6-minute slot to do a speech, because I couldn't obviously be part of the show. And so I remember that being my only moment where I did anything I was proud of at drama school, because I was able to find a speech that I was very comfortable with. The head worked with me on it, and I just had this moment where I could bring my chair to the front of the stage and do a part that I felt very comfortable with, probably more filmic than theatrical when I look back. And that also set me up with sort of contacts, and so it all kind of worked out in the end. But yes, it was an odd part to start with.
There was going to be different disciplines between film, television acting to on the stage. How do you find the transition from one to the other, and going straight from your job, which was being laid down there, to later on doing stage stuff? Did you find it difficult? Because I know that stage acting is a lot more over exaggerated because people need to see.
Yeah, again, very good question. I'm naturally a film and television actress, and I didn't know that. And the Bristol Old Vic in those days was geared to theatre, and great actors were coming out of the Bristol Old Vic and still come out of the Bristol Old Vic. And most drama schools, that is the grounding you get is in theatre, but they're all up to speed now with the fact that they give television and film tuition as well. And we didn't get that. And as soon as I was in front of a camera, I didn't have to project, and I could find a reality within me that I was comfortable with. Whereas stage actors know they're stage actors. My husband is a stage actor. He's wonderful on film, but he's a stage actor in the sense that he gets on stage and he's at home, as I said, even though he's lovely on film. But the definition is that when an actor walks on stage and they feel at home, they're comfortable with projecting to the back wall. And it took a lot for me to learn to project my voice. I've now got a much more rounded, louder voice. But projecting to the back wall, and projecting your emotions to the back wall, and projecting your actions to the back of the theatre was an uncomfortable thing that I had to get across. Whereas put the camera there, and I just thought, oh yes, I'm naturally at home here. just a different technique.
Now, I know that you had the spiritual thinking, philosophy inside yourself when you were acting. I thought you said you were.
Well, sort of.
Okay,
I'll come to that.
okay. So, can you say about your transition? Was that after Miss Moneypenny or before you had that?
Well, do you know, it was interesting because no. I was trying to look it up last night of when it was, because I was completely spiritually unaware. Really had not questioned anything at all. And I, my mother is and was Christian with a very deep belief, based on her own experience, and it was she, very spiritual lady, I think, but kept it. She didn't discuss it. We went to church on high days and holidays, and church didn't call me. So that was it as far as I was concerned. I didn't know about philosophy or questioning why I was on this earth or what it was to be human, nothing at all. And as was very ignorant of myself, I was just very, very ambitious to be a movie star. It's sort of just, talk about ego. That was what I wanted to do. I just thought, let me live in Hollywood and be, I wanted to be Shirley MacLaine, at the time. And because she had this vibrancy, and of course she I couldn't sing, but she danced wonderfully, and there was just a kind of inner life to her. Interestingly, again, I didn't know about her spiritual searching and her quest at that time, because it was before she brought out the book Out on a Limb, I think, which kind of was the start of her journey. So I was just completely unaware, and I worked with the actor Terence Stamp, and I'm trying to think of the name of the television piece that I worked. It's completely gone out of my mind, because I did a lot of television, and I worked with him, and he's an extraordinary man, and his presence was. It was like sort of meeting a unique kind of person that I hadn't met before. There was just something about him. And he had, a few years before, come back from India and Italy on sort of many years of a soul-searching quest. And he'd met the great Krishnamurti, philosopher, teacher, and been extremely affected by him. And so started to sort of talk to me, really. And he gave me a book. And as I say, I can't remember if I had done the first Moneypenny by then. I think possibly I hadn't. I tried to find a CV, and of course it's just not my life anymore, so I couldn't find anything I ought to know. But anyway, when I opened the book, and Krishnamurti, the book was called Freedom from the Known, and he was questioning my mind, my emotions, everything about what it is to be human and how that reflects the society and the world. And it was life-changing. I read it and I thought, why haven't I been asking this before? This is speaking to a deep part of myself that I didn't know existed. And it was like part of me coming home. I felt comfortable with this, challenged but comfortable. And that was very strange, because here was this big movie star, because people nowadays are not necessarily so aware of what a huge movie star Terence Stamp was, one of the most beautiful men that's ever lived, still very beautiful, saying fame is not where it's at, don't bother, this is where it's at. And of course, in my state at the time, my reaction to that was, well, no, I want both. You've got both. I want both. I want to be a big movie star in America, and I want to be spiritually enlightened, which of course was the big joke and the start of my having to question everything.
So obviously you're most notably known for the role of Miss Moneypenny. I think it's one of those roles that once you've got the name, some people, you'll always be Miss Moneypenny. Can you tell the journey that you took from when you were doing the early Diana television days to getting that role as Miss Moneypenny, please?
Well, I did a mixture, as I said, of theatre and television. The theatre that I was enjoying was the more intimate theatre. So I did 2 plays at Hampstead Theatre with the wonderful Mike Attenborough directing. And the first was Particular Friendships. And I was given, again, it was probably my first character role of a Sloaney sort of secretary. And, you know, people think that an actor's voice is posh. But actually, you know, Sloane is really like that. It really doesn't move their mouth at all and has a whole sort of different demeanour. And it's sort of yah all the time. And she was just fun for me. It was brilliantly written. It was very funny. It was a sort of comedy role. And it kind of just took off. And I had wonderful reviews, and it brought a bit of notice to me. I think I was sort of up for an Evening Standard Award. And suddenly there was a little bit of a buzz. And in the time between that and going back to Hampstead Theatre, about sort of, I think 6 months later or so, to do a play called Selling the Sizzle, while I was in that play, I went up for the role of Miss Moneypenny. And I was a Bond fan in the sense that I'd seen all the Bond films, but not a kind of, you know, an avid Bond fan, shall we say. So I thought, well, that's quite interesting. I'll go up for it. I really didn't see myself as Miss Moneypenny at all. Lois Maxwell had made the role into a, I don't know how to describe it, but she had a wonderfully comfortable quality that made her someone that Bond could feel very could flirt with, but also could feel sort of comfortable with as a kind of favourite sister, so there was a kind of I can't describe it. Anyway, you know the qualities Lois Maxwell had, and so it just didn't occur to me that I would be right. So I went up for it without thinking about it, and when I auditioned for it, they were lovely. Again, it was being auditioned by Americans, and I am partly American and partly Canadian. There's very little English in me, so maybe again I feel at home, but I was able to make them laugh, and we just got on. And I just think it was somehow to do with that sense of being relaxed with them. And I went back to the theatre that night, not really thinking very much about it. And when I walked off stage at the end, there in the bar was my agent with the casting director, raising a glass to me and saying, "Cheers to the new Miss Moneypenny." And it was bizarre because it was, you know, I just hadn't thought about it. And I do remember, and this, I guess this shows you how large my ego was at the time. Not my self-belief, they're quite different. Not the feeling of I'm special and wonderful, but the ego of I need to be special and wonderful. I think there's a great difference there. Because of my low self-worth, my ego was projecting that I had to be a massive movie star. There was part of that ego thinking, well, if I am Miss Moneypenny, exactly what you just said, I'm going to be Miss Moneypenny forever. And what else did Lois Maxwell do? She was then pigeonholed into that role, as Desmond Llewellyn was, as Q, as a lot of them were. And this was the day before Judi Dench's M, and you know all of this. It was you were the Bond film. So I remember thinking, because there was this buzz and I was this up and coming actress, oh, no one's asked me if actually this is a good career move, which makes me laugh now because of course you can't say no to a Bond film in Miss Moneypenny, and I wasn't going to say no, but it was like I haven't even had this conversation. So I found myself at the bar, you know, having a drink, going fantastic. And then the rest of the run for Selling the Sizzle, every time an actor came near me on stage, I mean, there's David Threlfall and, you know, some wonderful actors, they would be humming dum 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 dum. You know, it was just very silly. So that was, and one thing they did do was take me on set to meet Timothy Dalton, just to see if there was the right chemistry, the right magic. And we had people in common that we knew, so it was easy to chat to him. But the main thing that blew me away was arriving on set. And suddenly I realised how vast a thing I was stepping into. The set of a Bond film is like nothing else. It's overwhelming. It's extraordinary. So that was kind of quite awe-inspiring. And I thought, yeah, no, this is exciting now.
I probably had more experience talking to people in television, more documentary styles rather than actors and actresses. But I know certainly in television there's a hierarchy, and the further down you are, you have to stay quiet in the corner. When you were in something huge like the James Bond film, did you ever find it was like that? And if it is like that, what advice could you give to people that might find that a bit uncomfortable to step into in the first place?
No, it wasn't like that at all. It just wasn't like that. And I think actors on the whole are not like that. I think the better class of job you do, in the sense of the more experience people have had, the better people are. On the whole, strangely, the less ego there is. And I'd never thought about it actually, but talking to you, it's making me realise, again, all these uses of the word ego. There's the spiritual use, obviously, but then there's the egotistical use. And I think that when actors have the self-worth through experience and recognition, they don't need to project that ego onto, I need to be somebody. And so they're comfortable in their skin and are very welcoming to a newcomer. And that's, on the whole, what I found. I've come across very few, and there have been a few, but very few difficult actors who maybe make life awkward for, the newcomer. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 examples in all the years that I worked. On the whole, actors are more like children. They want to play together. They want to have a nice time. They want it to be a family. Yes, some of them, actors who have their own family or who are busy, will maybe be a little bit less sort of available and engaging. But on the whole, actors want to go to the bar and have a drink and tell a nice story. And if you're open to that and fun, then you're in. And the lovely thing about the Bond set was that John Glenn was directing, and he was just very welcoming. And he said to me, look, I know this is going to be really daunting for you, but I just want you to know that we've cast you because you are Moneypenny, and you just mustn't think about it. Tim was very welcoming, Barbara Broccoli, Mike Wilson, they were all just very comfortable with me being there. And so that helped. And of course, on films and in television, you're not often there with the whole cast. You're just there with the person in your scene. And of course, you both want to get on because you want to make the scene work.
So there was the hope of being a third James Bond film, and it didn't actually happen with Timothy Dalton because a whole lot of things went on behind the scenes. You obviously didn't come back for it again. Was there that ego side of you that kicked back in thinking, my goodness, now I've been typecast, what do I go and do now? Or were you completely fine about that and just want to know your thoughts and feelings?
It came at the right time for me, because I was much more pulled to the inner spiritual journey. And I was beginning to realise that my lovely image of being the massive movie star plus a sort of spiritual teacher who's free of ego was a kind of what's the word when something is sort of literally impossible. You can't be the pinnacle of an ego plus being free of your ego. So it was becoming very clear to me that the profession of acting was feeding my neurotic state and my ego of needing to become somebody, because you have to become somebody to walk in the room, to get the job, to engage in it. And at the same time, my deeper spiritual sense was saying, but I want to be free of that becoming of somebody. I want to just be. And I had no idea what form that was going to take, but I was questioning everything very deeply. And at the same time, I'm trying to think again of the timeline of whether I had whether I'd met my husband or not. But things were happening in my own life that I was pulling away, and I would have done. Obviously, I would have carried on playing Moneypenny, but it wasn't. And I also knew it was a limiting role. I mean, when you look at my two films, Blink and You Miss Me, they were very small roles, especially the second film. So they weren't very fulfilling as an actress. And of course, all the interviews, they would want to talk about Miss Moneypenny, and I'd think, well, I did a couple of days, really. I've just worked at the National Theatre, or I've worked in Worthing, or I've done these other jobs. And so when the phone didn't ring, no one ever said, "I'm sorry, Tim's not going again, so we're going in another direction." No one said anything at all. And very bizarrely, one of my best friends, one of my oldest friends, is the actress Samantha Bond. And I've been trying to call her for a while, and I hadn't heard back from her. And I thought, well, this is very odd, what's up with Sam? And I'd left messages. And eventually one day I phoned, and a friend of hers picked up the phone, and I said, "Hi, it's Caroline." I said, I've been trying to get hold of Sam. And she went, "Oh, has she not spoken to you yet?" And I said, "No, is everything all right?" She said, I'll get her to call you." And I thought, something awful, I really thought something awful had happened to Sam. So I was thinking along those lines when, an hour later, Sam phoned me, and in her wonderful sort of theatrical, "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry. I've been meaning to call you and I didn't know how to tell you." And I said, "What on earth has happened?" And she said, "They've offered me Moneypenny." And it was the weirdest thing. Sam and I had been to school together, to Ballet Rambert together, and to the Bristol Old Vic together, and we were friends. And here she was offered Moneypenny. And I just said, that's completely wonderful. If it's going to go to anybody, I want it to go to my friend, because it'll mean I'm still involved. I can still hear about it. And obviously she was relieved, I was relieved, and, we still remain very good friends. But how bizarre was that?
We were talking about the ego, and you're sort of saying that letting go of the ego, but to be on film, to be acting, do you think that you need to have a healthy level of ego to be able to do with what you need to do?
Yes. Again, very good question. I think there are two parts to this answer. The only actor that I've ever heard people talk about who was sort of almost egoless when they were acting, and people that read auras, I don't read auras and do all that, but would read his aura and could sort of see, was Paul Schofield, who genuinely didn't have a sort of self-interest, didn't have a skin somehow. There was no ego there. I don't know what he was like as a man, but that was how he was as an actor. And I think every other actor has to have, I love the phrase, a healthy ego, a sense of self in place in order to be able to act on film or stage. But the other thing is that I was very interested in a teacher at the time, a spiritual teacher called Andrew Cohen. And he had quite a vibrant team of followers around him. And one of those was an actor. And Andrew, I think he wrote an article about this actor wanting to stay being an actor while he was on the spiritual path. Or the actor wrote it, I can't remember which, but it was encompassing that problem. And of how do you square that? How do you do that? and this actor found it sort of almost impossible, deeply uncomfortable. Again, the other person that has managed to I mean, I'm sure there are many that I don't know of, but to tread that path is, of course, Terence Stamp.
So we mentioned Terence Stamp earlier, and he came up to you and he started talking about his spiritual philosophy and suggested Krishnamurti. Did you ever do that to anybody else, or once you started going on that spiritual path when you were acting, was it very much just held within? And if you did approach anybody, how did you approach them with it?
Oh, I was probably a nightmare. Look at what I found. This is the new reality. This is what I'm interested in. Yeah, I think I mistakenly. Well, it was like finding the most exciting thing ever, that obviously naturally you share it with everybody else. And I'd get remarks such as, oh, we did that at university, or, oh, been there, done that, or else just not interested at all in those days. I came across a few actors who shared my interest or who knew about Krishnamurti, but very few.
So there came a point when you actually decided to leave the acting world, and I believe you said that's right, when you decided to have your first child. Is that right, when the moment came to you? If you can say how much of a pull it was, or how easy it was. I know we sort of talked a little bit about that before, but if you can tell me how easy it was for you to just leave this role which you had all these visions, all these dreams about, as we were saying earlier on in this interview.
I think it was, as I'd mentioned, the last couple of jobs I had done, including The Invisible Man, where I met my husband, I was already not fully engaged in those jobs. So I was probably a better actress because I was less kind of full of self-doubt and worry and all of that. But it wasn't meaning that much to me. And I was enjoying it and I was loving the people I met. And I noticed that what was beginning to happen was that I would meet someone who was interested in philosophy, whether it be the makeup artist or the one of the technicians, or, it was often the crew. And I'd sit and get into a fascinating conversation, and someone would say, oh, Caroline, you're needed on set. And I'd think, oh, bother. So that was beginning to show. And then when I had my first child, I just thought, I was also interested in psychology, and I think someone had given me the book, The Drama of Being a Child, and I just felt that if I was going to be a mother, the kind of mother I wanted to be was a full-time mother, because I knew that because it wasn't natural for me to go and be the actress, it wouldn't have been a seamless kind of, oh, I can be mummy at home and then I'll do some acting and be mummy at home. It would have pulled me too far away from my child. And so I was the kind of woman that I'm a kind of person that I had to do it 100%. So it sort of wasn't really a question or a dilemma. It was a shock. It was a shock to go from being somebody to being a very grey mother pushing, her pram along. I tried to do the sling, but my baby was Matthew was far too heavy, and I couldn't carry him. So, pushing a pram along some sort of grey street, feeling utterly invisible. That was quite a shock.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you think would be good to do your acting world? Because I'm also aware that probably people start filling up in here at some point. But is there anything that you really feel is important that I haven't asked you during this section of the interview?
No, I think that an important moment, and possibly a section that just briefly to touch on, was when I did go out to LA, and so it was after the second Bond film. We filmed in Mexico, and I was flown all the way out to Mexico to do my Moneypenny bit. And at the end of that, I got a plane ticket to LA, and I thought, here we go. And it was a wonderful, free, kind of wild time. And I had sort of Farrah Fawcett, Charlie's Angels hair, and I was tanned from Mexico, and I was, my ego was fed from being off the Bond film. And I swept into Hollywood and went in for interviews. My agent in London had a couple of contacts, and the Bond people had a couple of contacts, and I just used them for all it was worth. And again, interviewing for Americans, and I'd say, I've just got off the plane from a Bond film, this is the only outfit I've got, sorry, going back to do a play in England soon, but thought I'd find what was here. And I got an agent at William Morris, and I got, people were going, oh my God, she's going to be the next Glenn Close. This is, and it was like, okay, this is going to happen. And went back to England, did the Paradise Club and maybe another job. And as I was preparing to go out, there was an actor strike in America, and then there was a writer strike. And by the time I got out, I had started the inner journey. And I was questioning things. I was quite different. I had quite short hair, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't kind of believe in it anymore. I was trying for all I was worth to be that person again, but I just sort of couldn't. I didn't know who I was. I was kind of in the unraveling stage, so I was not in a good place, and I could see doors closing. And then I walked down Santa Monica Pier, and one drizzly day, and there were these cardboard cutouts of Marilyn Monroe and Robert Redford, and you could pay who were heroes, and you could pay $5 to have your picture taken with them. And they were lent up on the side, and the guy had gone because it was sort of drizzling, and they were sort of tarpaulin was over it. And I just looked at this and I thought, that's what I'm spending all my energy trying to become. That's it. It's just like, it's nothing. It's this thin. It's got nothing to do with life, with reality. And it was an utterly, utterly massive cathartic moment for me. And I sat in the drizzle for about 3 hours and cried, because it was like all my childhood dream sort of just kind of shattering, but in the best possible way. It was painful but liberating at the same time. And I thought, I see it now. I see it now. I don't need that.
When you were crying, did you actually find that a good release? Because a lot of people say crying is such a good release. And how did you feel after it was all out of you?
Oh, I felt very clear. I felt very calm. I wasn't in conflict anymore. I'd realised how I was in conflict in America because I was trying to be that person that I'd been a year and a half ago, and I wasn't that person anymore. And so I felt very calm, and I went back to my lovely friend who I was sharing a flat with, this American lady, and and I told her what had happened. She was like, "Oh no, my God, Caroline, that's your dream." She thought I had to be this actress. It was so that was kind of odd. It wasn't like, "How wonderful for you." It was her dream I was shattering as well.
Do you find a lot of your friends and family had similar reactions to your news as that?
I think they knew me. They'd seen the journey. So, I mean, it wasn't like I was coming home and saying I'm never acting again. It wasn't that. It wasn't like that. I definitely wasn't going to be out in LA pursuing the stardom. It was that had ended. I still came back. I still had The Invisible Man to do. There was a lot of acting and there was a lot of finding what to do still. But it was that sort of becoming a star. It was that ego thing that had dropped away. I think my mother probably found it the hardest, even though she understood it the most, because of course I was her, lovely daughter, and she kind of wanted me to be that star too.
We've now moved from the wonderful cinema where we were just a moment ago, and we're sitting in the beautiful Pittville Park. And you're a lady who's been well travelled, not just through being an actress, but also as well throughout your life. So I always think that when you travel anywhere, where you stayed and been always leaves a part of itself within inside you. So if you like to talk about where you've been and some of the places which have really inspired you during your travels.
Well, I'm a London girl. I was born and bred in London, and I feel still London in here. London is kind of where I am. It's where my family has always been. We're not from London, as I say. There's a lot of American and Canadian in my family, but so London has a special place in my heart. We then moved to. We've lived in Brighton. Wonderful being by the sea. Brighton is such a sort of interesting, vibrant place, a really nice mixture of town and sea and then the countryside behind. But then we moved down to Devon, and again, such different quality. Devon just felt like we were really engaging in nature properly for the first time. And we had a little small holding, and we were trying to do the good life, really, and we hadn't a clue. I mean, you know, we were strewing corn for the chickens, and then, of course, the foxes moved in and the rats moved in, and before we knew it, you know, we were having to lock the chickens up all the time, and our sort of dreams of just enjoying our little few acres that we had, we realised that the brambles came up, the nettles came up, you had to have a ride-on mower, you had to have, basically you should have full-time help, you know, if you're not proper gardeners. So idyllic though it was also hard work. And then we moved from there down to Cornwall, where we brought up our sons for a good 9 years. And that again is very special, beautiful beaches. The centre of Cornwall is, you know, it's quite it's a happening place and it's a struggling place at the same time. There are so many pockets of different realities down there. But yes, a very sort of weird and wonderful place in many ways when all the tourists go home. But I think one of the other places that affected me most was Mexico, and that was filming the second Bond film. And I was, as I say, the gift of being flown out to Mexico to do 2 days filming. And we were in Mexico City, and I just walked through Mexico City, and an enlightened friend had said, why, they're flying you out first class and return, why don't you cash that in for a normal flight and use the extra money to fly and to go to different places? So I first of all flew down to Isla Mujeres, and I travelled on the bus on my own across Mexico from one side to the other, and through the mountains, I was looking at a lot of the old wonderful ruins, the pyramids, and travelling on my own in a country that I really didn't know was very liberating. It was probably much safer in those days, I don't know, but it felt safe. The Mexican people are just lovely. And then when I got to Oaxaca, I flew up to New Mexico and Santa Fe, and I looked at all that around there and met some wonderful artists. And then I flew out to LA and had my first, which I mentioned earlier, a sort of, you know, fantastic time just coming off the Bond set into LA. So, but Mexico, yeah, has a sort of strong place in my heart.
So you said you were travelling around Mexico alone for a lot of it. Because I'm somebody who doesn't actually really travel around alone much. What do you think travelling alone actually gives you, a perspective that you might have when you're by yourself to whether being with a friend or a group of friends, a partner, loved one, etc.?
Oh, it's hugely different. It's hugely different. It throws you right back on yourself. It teaches you about yourself. And there's something liberating about it, because when you're with somebody that you know, you're that person. When you're on your own, you're not limited by any parts of your past or future. You're just present, and you meet people as you are that moment. And it's incredibly refreshing. You're incredibly vulnerable. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone has to go out there and travel on their own, because I think the world is quite different now from 35 years ago. But if you are one of those intrepid people, it's just very, very liberating. You're not in your safe cocoon of being who you are, slightly protected and protective of the person or people you're with.
At this point in the interview, the weather changed, and we moved location to Caroline's home in Gloucestershire. Gloucestershire is a beautiful county encompassing the Forest of Dean and the Cotswolds.
So we had to move location because the heavens just decided to open whilst we were inside, as we were at the Pitfield pump rooms and as we were at the Pitfield Park. But if you could finish that wonderful story you begin to tell us, and maybe start from the beginning about your spiritual journey, and then actually finding yourself and actually just be able to quiet your mind and be within that stillness.
So start the answer again?
Start it again, I think.
Okay. So, yes, when I first started trying to put into practice the teachings of Krishnamurti and the teachings of being free of the self, I had this wonderful idea that I could just drop it all. I could drop the ego, I could drop becoming, but I could also drop all of Caroline as well, and all of my past and my traumas and my difficulties and my the bits I didn't like and my worries and my problems, and I could just drop it all, which was the image I had of free of the self, and I could transcend into this place of stillness and peace. And so I tried practicing this, just observing myself and trying not to react all the time. And I realized that actually I was just repressing myself. I was controlling myself. And with that, I realized that I wasn't actually very able to feel my emotions. And so I was imposing this state of, I'm very spiritual, on a slightly sort of frozen inner state of control. And after a while, I thought that no, there must be another way. This isn't right. And various things were happening in my life, and I was splitting up from a relationship, and suddenly I wasn't dealing with it very well. So I thought, well, let me find out who myself is first. As we said earlier, being an actress, I had no idea who myself was. So let me find out who myself is before taking the journey of being free of myself. So I dived into various forms of therapy, which kind of, a lot of the spiritual teachers of the East say that's just like opening the rubbish bag of your life and sifting through it. It's pointless, just put the rubbish bag of your life out and be free of it. So there was a slight sense of guilt of I'm probably not supposed to be doing this, as I went to, all kinds of therapy that was going on in the 80s back then. And from each one, I gleaned something. I learnt something about myself. I also learnt how to access my emotions. I learnt about all the undigested parts, the traumas of my life and all of that. But then I started to realize that the language was very much about healing and not being free of. So there was this sense of wanting to heal all the problems or wanting to understand all the problems, but not a sense of being completely free of the separate self. And that's what I had been drawn to. So I moved back from the intensity of the therapy back to the spiritual teachings, and particularly of Krishnamurti, but also of Gurdjieff, of Nisargadatta Maharaj, Ramana Maharshi, Inayat Khan with the Sufis, just, really steeping myself in all of that. But Krishnamurti being the one closest to my heart, although I never met him. And now I was coming at it from a sense of being inside myself with all my problems and complexes and all my understanding. And, yes, I'd cried a lot of things out. I'd released a lot of anger, but there's always something else. There's always another issue or lifetime or all of this. And I was seeing that. So I came back to these very, very profound, simple teachings, and I began to see a way of putting them into practical practice. This was before I'd met my husband, or just as around the same time. Maybe I met him just after this. And I had a couple of very profound experiences where I was able to see the whole of myself rising up, wanting to react, and instead of controlling it or pushing it away or judging it, I was able to observe it and allow it to flower and die through me, and without acting on it, find that witness state within that was beyond it, that wasn't attached to it. And these weren't just little incidents. These were quite big emotional incidents. And from that, I began to see that there was something really profound beyond that I couldn't reach with my brain. I couldn't manifest it or manufacture it. It wasn't like sitting and meditating and making my mind still, my brain still. It was seeing in the moment of acting in the world that I could establish myself in a different place. And as I began to really work with that, life challenged me more and more, until there was a moment when I spent about sort of 4 days really staying present in the witness of myself through, I think it was the leaving of my last boyfriend, or it was a very big cathartic, in what could have been a very emotional time, and I sensed this complete freedom. And soon after that, I then was down in Brighton by the sea, and I had my first experience of where absolutely everything fell away, and I saw my whole life. I saw the movement of the self of my whole life as this perfect movement of not just my life, but of a life, and how each curve of the journey, each trauma or each joy, or every single part of that life had been woven in to the perfection of the tapestry of all of life, and that all the things that I thought were problems or issues or were keys to finding this sense of deep awareness, had I but known. And they'd all led me to that moment then. They'd all led me to now. And in that now was infinity. That suddenly opened up. So I was the infinite looking at the time-bound self, and laughing and crying for hours of the extraordinary nature of how man stays in ignorance when all the time actually we are intrinsically free, we are intrinsically present. I hope that answers that.
No, it does. But when you said you're being tested more and more in life, were you, when you reached that plane, been able to handle it, or was it you had good days and you had bad days? Because I find with myself, sometimes I have great days where I'm doing really well spiritually, and other days where I'm struggling a bit. How was it feel? Did you reach that plane and were just able to handle those challenges?
Well, I think that we've been slightly fed an image from the East, but also we've taken in our Western minds of this plane of perfection, of this state of perfection, that when we get it right, or when we're spiritual enough, we don't have problems. And I think that that's really misleading, because it sets up the brain as a constant judge. How am I doing? Am I becoming more spiritual? Am I becoming better? Am I handling it well today? Or, oh, I'm failing today, or I've gone back into it, or whatever. And I guess the image that I use is of the optical illusion of the silhouettes and the vase. And you can either see the silhouettes, which would be two people sitting in a room, separate, or nothing changes but a shift in perception, and you see the vase, one, and you don't see two separate silhouettes anymore. There's just one. And so that image for me is that there's no right or wrong. Sometimes life challenges us to be the human and to go into the silhouette and say, what is it that I'm stuck with? What is it that I'm not feeling or allowing to flow through? What is it that I'm judging? And when that then frees up again, there is the space and the lack of judgment and the love to move back into the vase. And this is, for me, where the essence of my work comes from, because I think the quality is compassion. And as I say, we've set ourselves up as right and wrong, all the opposites. Am I being good? Am I bad? Am I spiritual? Am I not spiritual? Whereas for me, it's like a dance. If I know that all my fears and my anger and my pain and my anxieties and all that, if I know the root of that, and the root of that is the self, and I've gone on the whole journey of the self from the inner child's perspective, from all through my life, I know everything about this being with such compassion now, because it's been allowed to flower. I therefore know, and this sounds odd, but I therefore know everyone else's being, because we may have a different package and a different story, but we have the same process, the same emotions, the same challenges, even though, as I say, they're packaged in a different story. We all fear, we have anger, we have pain, despair, suffering, rage, guilt, all the rest of it. So I know myself, but I know other selves. So when I reach a point where there's, I have two wonderful sons, I think as a mother, you're never free to just be in this plane of, oh, it's all one, it's all perfect, because you're interacting with the world and all its precariousness all the time, especially as a parent or as a child of parents who are getting older or whatever. And so to expect the human to stay in that plane of detachment, I see it rather that one's being asked to dive back into the silhouette and find the compassion. What is it that I need to love? What is it that I need to open, back to vulnerability, that I need to allow myself to be more vulnerable, to allow myself to feel? Can I really have the courage to feel that? And as that comes through, again, I don't act on it, because then that's creating from the self. I just allow it through, and I hold myself or the other in compassion. And from that movement of compassion, which is a joining either with myself or with another, it's like the energy moves through, and then there is the wisdom to come, or the presence out of that to come back into the state of oneness. So it's a dance.
I like the analogy of the dance. I know that you were kind of tested in a way from your spiritual beliefs you brought up with when you suddenly had your first child. Can you describe that experience to us, and also as well the learning you got from that change of thinking as well?
Yes, I'd had this extraordinary experience that I talked about, and I was in a state of grace for about 2 years. And which was, it wasn't this plain, but it was a state of grace. I wasn't really responsible for anybody at that time. I met my husband. It was a kind of wondrous time, and I thought, well, I've done it now. I can, I was desperate to communicate this to other people. I thought at some point I'd love to teach this, and then we decided that having children would be a lovely route to go down. So as soon as I became pregnant, suddenly, instead of this unconditional relationship to life, I faced the new consciousness of a mother to be. And so all these fears came in of, will my child be okay? And my own sister was mentally handicapped, and she had measles and encephalitis when she was 15 months, so which damaged her brain. She's my greatest teacher. We all adore her. She's still with us. But when you've experienced growing up with something like that, you know that pregnancy and birth is not necessarily, and having children, a totally straightforward thing. So the fear came in, and I bought into the fear. And I remember, I didn't notice it was incremental. But if you'd asked me, do you want to be free, or do you want to know that your child will be healthy and happy? It would have been the latter. And so I bought into the story. Of course, I wanted my child to be healthy and happy. It didn't occur to me that you could just be both, because that was a state of detachment that I wasn't able to be at, if that makes sense. So I plunged back into darkness. And when I had my first son, it was a long and quite difficult birth. And I then suffered from postnatal depression, which completely floored me. And it was so humiliating. It was like, no, but I know the secrets of the whole universe, and I'm one with all that is. And I'm now failing as a mother, because I thought, I'll be this enlightened mother. It's just so obvious and so simple. So I'm now failing as a mother. I'm failing as a human being. I'm plunged back into the darkness. I don't know anything at all. And I've got health visitors, saying, are you all right? And I want to go, no, I'm the whole universe. But right this minute, I'm lost. And I didn't, it was a very challenging time.
Somebody that's listening to this right now, because you were given all those challenges, might be going through a really dark time. What things could you suggest to get somebody to start to feel happy about where they are right now?
Well, obviously, I would love them to start my work, because that's the point. I think that, what I feel I'm offering, because just to sort of finish off, out of that darkness of having my son, and then I went on to have my other son, and they're both totally wonderful and are, again, my teachers, it gave me the final part of the equation. Up until that time, I was only responsible for myself. And so the awakening had been very clean, very clear. And after that, in the state of grace, there were no challenges. When I then became a mother, I was plunged into the world of challenge, of relationship, parenting, and all of that. And so I learnt through the humility of failing. And, my boys would challenge me all the time, and I would fail. When I say fail, I would act in ways that I wasn't proud of. Nobody fails, nobody succeeds. And, I've done a perfectly decent job, but I would fail in my own eyes. And out of that came the teaching of compassion, came the sense that I had to hold myself in absolute love as a woman in her, late 30s, 40s. I wasn't that young when I had children, flailing around, coping with all sorts of difficulties. We didn't have very much money. We were moving. We were, just all the challenges that motherhood brings, that parenthood brings. And when I could hold myself in the compassion of that, that's when I connected with this emotional body of that leads you. It's like we each have this emotional body that is the guiding light that takes us through life and says, this is what you're going to experience in order to be free of the self. So possibly I had not plumbed the depths of some of my rage and pain that, of course, when you have children and they're strong-willed, you find yourself in a rageful fit and you think, but I'm free of this. Why am I, around the supermarket or in the car or, so it's like, okay, I've got a lot more to learn here. And so from that, it was starting again. And from that, I found this sense of the link between the Western therapy and which takes you to sort of self-love, and the Eastern freedom from the self. Because out of the self-love rises this compassion. And only when this compassion is there and we hold ourselves in love, does the inner child, so to speak, say, well, now I'm ready to have the altruistic life. Now I'm ready for the teachings the spiritual teachings of going further. So I am in the process of writing. I've nearly finished writing a book, and I hope that that would be a lovely place for people to start when eventually that book's available. I do lead retreats. I work less on a one-to-one basis, just because there's not so much time. But I'm starting to want to give talks and do more work and reach a wider audience. So I suppose what I would say to people is come onto my website. Don't judge yourself. Wherever you are now is exactly where you're supposed to be. Have the courage to not judge yourself, to maybe look at the roots of some of those dark places. But there isn't anything out there that I could point to at the moment.
I think self-forgiveness and forgiveness of others is hugely important. And you're talking about rage inside and all those sorts of things. Can you talk a little bit about the power of forgiveness, self and to others?
I think when you've really gone to the root of the problem, whether it's somebody's behavior to you or your behavior to somebody else or to yourself, and you have realized with your heart, not just with your intellect, that that action had come out of patterns upon patterns upon patterns of ignorance, of the sort of subjective reactive way of the self, I think then the forgiveness takes on a quality of realizing that it couldn't be any other way, rather than I forgive you. And in my work in the last 9 years, I've worked and watched people forgive things that you would think, no, that's really not possible to forgive, but they have come to a place inside where they are able to completely let it go because they see the root of ignorance in themselves and each person. And then there's love.
I also know that there's a lot of arguments going on through social media because people so often misinterpret what they've seen on people's Facebooks, on Twitter and things like that. What's your view about, I think social media can be brilliant, but also it can be harmful, and just people that may be watching too many things on YouTube or, not interacting, the importance of real interaction and being, be listening to each other. You can talk about that, please.
I think what I would say is that social media invites comparison, constantly invites comparison, and comparison is one of the hardest things to cope with because we run a constant comparison in our minds all the time anyway. So we compare ourselves to how we want to be. We all have an ideal picture of who we are at our best or who we want to be. And we've had that since from growing up because that is how the human brain is conditioned. The human brain exists within time, within these thoughts. And we're told that we need to be better at our exams, or we need to be more quieter or more well-behaved, or we need to be like our brother or our sister, or we need to be... There's constant comparison. And as I say, the brain grows up with this as a habit. And social media is just a reflection of the inside of our brains. It's just mirroring back to us how we are as humanity. And unfortunately, therefore, we go onto social media and we compare ourselves. And I think that the wonderful thing about social media is that it can connect us, but instead of seeing how similar we are, we actually think we see how different we are. And as I said, it breeds this sort of endless worry and paranoia.
Okay, so when you have these retreats, it's a group experience for everybody. What do you think sort of energies can build up with the group doing the work that you do, and some just wonderful stories, if somebody doesn't mind an experience that's been brought up like as a group to be shared now on camera.
I would say that the energy of the group is very powerful. I've loved working one-to-one because I love the intricacies of really getting to the nitty-gritty of everybody's story and how they trap themselves in their thoughts and the twists and turns of their journey, and how they think that those are a problem and they don't realize that actually those are the sort of perfect twists and turns for them. But I think that what a group gives to each other is this sense of shared humanity. And it's not just my group, I think group work gives that. And so when we are looking at the individual self within a group, someone tells their story and you can see the rest of the group nodding. When someone has an aha moment or a shift inside themselves, or they suddenly see their story from a perspective of love or a perspective of perfection, that then can be shared in the group as well. The shift happens throughout the group. And then, so the first part of the retreat is really seeing, is exploring the self. And the second part of the retreat is experiencing freedom from the self. And the dropping into the witness state and experiencing, or experiencing is the wrong word, but being the oneness of all that is something that very much has a palpable energy of presence that has its own. It becomes stronger, obviously, the more people that are there in it. And there's something very powerful about knowing each other's, about knowing the silhouette and knowing the vase, and therefore an acceptance of that dance when you've shared that within a group, because we all accept someone else's story so much easier than our own. Difficult to share stories, but if somebody has gone through a trauma or has got a particular difficulty with a parent or sibling or an experience, and they, recount it, and there are others in the group that share that, I often find that my groups are there's often a theme that just so happens that a number of people that come on the retreat are like, well, that's extraordinary because you've just told my story. So
you're going to be doing a wonderful talk at the Isbourne, and of course it'll be wonderful. I would like to let everyone know about the title of it, because I do love the title of what you've chosen.
I've called it Ego, Moneypenny and Enlightenment, a journey from actress to spiritual teacher.
Okay. And when people come to along, because they've obviously heard what you've been talking about now, is there any other little tidbits that people are going to really enjoy during that talk that you think will be real good, and what will people gain and come out of it after? Or maybe you think they'll gain and come out of after?
Well, you're too good an interviewer and you've gone into an awful lot of detail, but there are more examples of my life that I want to share with. The point that I think I want to get over with the talk is not about my life being any kind of special journey that I've found a secret, or I've played this wonderful part, or had this amazing career and now I'm a teacher. It's more the sense that the things that the life that I have had, okay, take aside Moneypenny, not many, 3 people have played, 4 people, 5 people have played Moneypenny, but taking aside that, each life is perfect in its own way. And the journey of seeing how perfect your life is, I hope that I will be able to share with the talk in an entertaining way. I mean, it's that weird irony that I'm going to have to talk about myself as I try and communicate how it is to be free of the ego. But there's kind of no way around that. But yes, I hope that, you know, there will be some entertaining stories and also some areas of profound realizations that I will be able to share with people. And if people have questions, of course, hopefully, you know, people will have some questions too.
I'm sure they most certainly will do. Anything else you would love to say that I haven't asked you during this time with you today, which I really thank you for this time we've had today?
No, just great pleasure. It's been lovely to talk to you. And yes, I think we've covered the sort of whole spectrum really of everything. So thank you very much.
Caroline, thank you so much.
And with that, my wonderful day with Caroline came to a close.